Well, I grew up in Belfast. I was pretty much born the year that the so-called Troubles started there, and lived there until that all ended. I think I left more. It wasn't long after it finished that I left for various reasons. I mean, I go back there a couple of times a year at the moment. But after my sort of professional background was technology, and worked in a whole bunch of different industries. Ended up working in the financial industry for a hedge fund, and then at the end of that 5-year stint, I decided I needed a little bit of a break, so went and lived in France for a couple of years. And then when we decided to come back to the UK, we thought to ourselves, where are we going to go? And well, around that same time, I met Brian Garish, and so we decided to come to Plymouth for our sins, and we've been here since. So I was already typesetting, laying out the UK column newspaper, looking after the website and so on, while I was still in France. But when we came back to Plymouth, I more or less joined full time, and took on a couple of other sort of professional contracts to sort of fund the thing for the first few years. But January is our 20th anniversary, and that's going to be quite a celebration next year.
That's phenomenal. 20 years in the alternative independent space. Right.
And you know, the story began really with Brian just when he left the Navy. He came to Plymouth, was working in the business sector, and just began to see the sheer corruption, and then came up against our old friend Common Purpose, and you know, from that point he just started being contacted with people that were experiencing the same types of things that he was experiencing. So, you know, corruption at local level was certainly how the column got started, and then of course since then we've appreciated that a lot of the corruption that's seen at a local level has a foundation in global politics and international politics, geopolitics, and we start to see the local effects of the sort of more globalist World Economic Forum types of policies rippling down to local level. So what he was experiencing at that point certainly involved a lot of EU funding and money coming from, you know, tax exempt foundations and these types of things, and that's really what we've been covering ever since, mainly.
Is that why UK column has lasted?
I think UK column has lasted because we appreciated from the beginning that this was not going to be a 5-minute deal, that there are no quick fixes to the wrongs of the world, that we had to make a commitment. And he certainly had made a commitment. I made that commitment. Everybody else that's come to work with us has made similar commitments, and we recognized that you know, it's easy to fall into the trap of demoralization and getting bored and getting the idea that this is all unfightable. But the fact of the matter is, there have been numerous wins over the years, and I would say that the other thing to keep in mind is that when we look at the documentation that globalists, the policymakers have written over the years, they have set deadlines for themselves, and they have not met any of those deadlines. And the main reason for that, I believe, is because of the pushback from ordinary people. So, you know, when I see people saying, well, there's no point doing this, or there's no point doing that, because it doesn't really have it absolutely has an effect. And now there is a slight downside to this, and that is that, just speaking purely personally, I believe that what we're facing, the corruption that we're seeing, only is dealt with when it becomes obvious to the most unwilling participant And we saw that during COVID, for example, because that was the lockdowns, vaccine policies. These were in everybody's faces. They couldn't avoid it. It was affecting them all personally, and so everybody got, lots and lots of people got engaged. And since then, we have seen a massive fall off in the number of people getting engaged or staying engaged, because they see that threat has disappeared. And in fact, it hasn't disappeared, because the policies that brought us COVID were there before, they're there since. Nothing has changed. And so, I think one of the messages that we have always tried to keep pushing out there is that everybody needs to be making the long-term commitment and sticking with it, because that's the only way that we can succeed.
Yeah, that's something you and I spoke about a few weeks ago. This tendency of people to quote unquote go back to sleep. It's very strange. COVID's over now. There we go. It's all back to normal. But the irony is that it absolutely isn't.
No, it isn't. That particular gambit has been played, and I believe it failed spectacularly. But what it absolutely demonstrated was the willingness of the national governments right across the Western world, at least, the willingness of national governments to treat their populations extremely badly. But we see the same policy in the assisted dying bill that's going through Parliament at the moment. We in the UK, we see that the World Economic Forum hasn't gone anywhere. Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 haven't gone anywhere. Net zero policy is being pushed forward. The war policy, the absolute insanity that's being displayed by Western leaders at the moment, where they on one hand are saying we've got to build a war machine to take on Russia, and on the other hand we've got the United States Navy being beaten by Yemenis who Yemen, which is the poorest country in the world, and are we seriously trying to persuade ourselves that we could take on Russia or China or both? It's insane. So the first thing we got to recognize is that our political leaders are basically unhinged at the moment. And I think part of this is because the policy agenda has not progressed at the speed that it was supposed to have. The deadlines have been missed, and they're coming under massive pressure.
That's a good point. So a lot of people who look at these big pictures tend to assume that it's all a well-oiled machine, and it really isn't. There's a lot of infighting. There's a lot of competing happening at the highest levels, which also adds to the failures.
That's absolutely correct, and we've got to appreciate that. Human beings are human beings. Some of them display slightly more psychopathic traits than others, but when you get groups of people together, there is inevitably differences of opinion. Sometimes this can lead to significant conflict within groups, and the so-called power elites are no different to anybody else. So if anybody's worked in a group and campaigning or any kind of activism, we all have experienced breakdowns within as different opinions come in and different views about which direction to go. And this is all normal in a sense, but for them, that of course, if they have deadlines to meet, causes them problems as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Agenda 2030, I mean, the deadline is obviously 2030, but it's very clear that a bunch of those ambitions are just not going to be met. And that is because of the extreme complexity of human nature.
It's also because I think they have a fairly arrogant view of humanity. I think that they look down on humanity as being, parasitic and not very clever and so on. But in fact, they're not the sharpest tools in the box either. And although the main focus of their play acting changes. One day it's COVID, next day it's war policy. If you look at the events, the big events that have been there, created in order to drive change in society, 9/11, 7/7, the whole terrorism thing, COVID, doesn't matter what it is, their modus operandi are the same. It's the way that they structure these operations is the same, and people recognize this, and they know when they're being played. A lot of people do, and so a lot of people may not be willing to openly say things the way you and I might openly say things, and I've had people say to me in the past, your views are extreme, but actually, people recognize when they're being played, and so they do resist in a certain sense, and that undoubtedly has happened time and time again.
I've had that same accusation that my views are extreme, but that doesn't make any sense, because what are the metrics? People only say that when it's outside of their own comfort zone. Oh, well, that person's extreme, but it's never them who's extreme. So, I don't think that means anything.
I think that if you're perceived to be presenting something which is not reality yet, then that is perceived as being extreme. So that comment, I'm going to say that comment was made to me for the first time probably in 2008 or 2009, when we were saying things like, this is what's coming, and that was viewed by some people as being extreme. Of course, you look back at what was said in 2008 and 2009, in 2020 and 2021, and actually what was said then isn't extreme anymore, because it's actually happened, right?
Yes.
So the perception of extreme views is something which, as the activities of the political class becomes more and more extreme, and it absolutely has become more and more extreme, then of course what was perceived as extreme by us at one point is no longer perceived that way.
How did COVID impact your worldview, your paradigm?
It didn't impact it at all, because it was not a surprise. When was the first SARS?
2003, I think.
Yeah, what was a surprise was it a surprise? But it shouldn't have been a surprise. So if it was a surprise, it was the fact that or maybe it was swine flu. It was swine flu. They tried the same gag with swine flu in 2010.
10, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, sometime around then. And just to give one example, Channel 4 News, which is a public service Channel 4 is a public service broadcaster in the UK. The BBC is the main public service broadcaster, and of course it's funded by taxpayer money, effectively through the so-called license fee. But Channel 4 News, Channel 4 is a commercial channel, but it's also a public service broadcaster, and so it has certain rules that it has to follow. And for many years, it probably ran the best mainstream news program for many years. That I'm not saying it was good. I'm just saying it was better than all the others, right? So it's all relative. That started to change when the proxy war in Syria began. So that started to change in 2011, and over the subsequent years, Channel 4 News began working directly with terrorists in Syria and so on, and we started to see the standard of the output from Channel 4 becoming much more propagandist. So when the swine flu thing hit, they actually produced some really good reports on how the pharmaceutical industry was attempting to generate fear within society and create a situation where they could sell their products. And then when COVID hit, despite the fact that it was exactly the same playbook that was being used, Channel 4 News completely flipped and went the other way and got right behind the narrative. So I'm going to say that when the COVID thing began, it was December 2019. We started to hear the sort of the first hints of it, and January, February, March, it was starting to build. It was probably late April before UK Column was really engaging with that topic, and this is one of the things that some of the criticism we get from sometimes, you haven't commented on X, Y, or Z, and one of the things that we prefer to do is to actually get a better, no knee-jerk reactions to stuff. We want to actually analyze and get a better view of what's going on around us before we comment on some things. So it took us a little bit to start commenting on COVID, but and certainly, when we did start commenting on it, I was getting, my father, for example, was saying, "Are you sure about this? Are you sure you're right about this? It could go wrong for you if you're not," and this kind of thing. But actually, I think we more or less had it understood from the beginning.
How do you think? Let me rephrase that. Why do you think that there are people like us who are willing to engage in these streams of thought?
I think you've got people that play in the game, and you've got people that don't, and the vast majority of people don't.
But why?
I don't know that I have an answer to that. I think that everybody that, I think that in the political elites, you certainly have a proportion of the population who are inclined to desire power and desire influence, and that's what drives them. On our side of the argument, I think that most people have experienced something in their lives which has triggered some kind of reaction. Whether that's, Northern Ireland was. I don't want to underplay what it was, because there's some real brutality happened on both sides in that conflict. But at the same time, in terms of global conflicts, you've got to put it into perspective. 30 years of conflict and 3,500 deaths. Well, there's been days in Gaza where there's been 3,500 people killed in a day, or in a couple of days. So in Syria the same. So you got to keep it was a low intensity operation, that whole thing. But just to give an idea of what sort of, again, I don't like to use the term "woke me up," because I just don't like that entire concept. But when I was quite young, my father started a business. He got himself some premises on an industrial estate, and he had been at it for about less than a year, and it was blown up by the IRA. And not because it's an industrial estate. There was no political reason to attack that particular location. But the reason was that, in fact, most of the paramilitary groups in Northern Ireland were basically running a mafia operation. So they were splitting Belfast up into sections, and this was your section to run your protection racket, and the landlord or the owner of the industrial estate hadn't paid their protection money, so the place was blown up, right? But the thing about it was, we knew some people in the police, and a friend of ours told us that his colleague had watched the bomb being placed in the car, had watched it being driven down the road, had watched it being left at the location, and had been told to leave it alone. And you say to yourself, well, hold on a second. This is the Royal Ulster Constabulary. They're supposed to be fighting the IRA. Why are they being told to leave an explosive device alone and allowing a bomb to go off in something which is not involved in the conflict? And it became absolutely clear to us that people within the police force in Northern Ireland were being handed brown envelopes. And so then it's not a then you've got a situation where people that are supposed to be fighting for political ideals are in fact compromising those ideals by directly paying off and engaging with the people on the other side. So there's therefore more to this conflict than meets the eye, and that just was the trigger that got me asking questions, and then I started looking into other areas and so on. So for other people, they have a much harder time, and for other people, it's because they've been subject to some form of abuse, for example, or it's because they've come into contact with common purpose, or it's because they've come into contact with come into contact with some kind of diversity training or something. Something has triggered them, and all it takes is for that trigger to happen, and the questions start being asked, and then before you know it, you actually want to try to do something about what's going on around you.
But Matthias Desmet says approximately 30% of people will have those experiences where they will kind of see through things. But at any given stage, around 70% will not necessarily. Well, about 30% will just simply be switched off. But then around that middle section, so you've got 30 on either side, and then that middle section, which is the largest, will tend to be either aware but not really say anything. They don't want to rock the boat or anything like that. So I think that's fairly accurate from my own experience over the last few years. If I think about 2020, when this whole thing started, I immediately thought something's wrong here. This doesn't make sense. But the majority of people around me, believed it. This is serious. Hold on, we need to stay away from our folks. We don't want to kill them. That kind of thing. And I felt like I was one of the very few who was either off my head, or I saw something that others didn't, and I could never understand why it was like that.
Yes, I mean, I can't give any great insight other than, I can't give
Come on, Mike.
to why the average person just sits there and does nothing. I don't. But it has to be said that a big proportion of the people that consider themselves awake are happy to just sit there and do nothing. They consume content, they consume the fear porn, and they're particularly engaged with the fear porn. But they don't want to actually get involved in doing anything about it, because that is actually scary for people.
That is a really big issue for me. It is this idea that people are consumers of sensation and fear. They will rather share hysterical stories than say something that is a solution.
It's one of the reasons that the column has a lot of support, but we also have a lot of people that don't consider us to be serious, or they consider us to be some kind of limited hangout, or they consider us to be shills of some kind. And part of the reason for that is that we don't jump on the sensationalist fear porn bandwagons. We try to be as level-headed about what's going on around us as we can, and we're trying to minimize the impact of the scariness of everything, and try to be, as I say, as level about things as we can. You can't talk about the topics that we talk about and make them soft and fluffy. That isn't possible, because actually what's happening is pretty unpleasant in a lot of cases. We've got to recognize and be realistic about what's going on, but the sensationalism doesn't help, but I do, but unfortunately it's that kind of content that tends to get the real traffic.
It's akin to driving past an accident that's just occurred. Everybody will slow down to have a look to see the carnage.
Oh, well, they'll have a look, but it's very rare that somebody will stop. I mean, just to give a practical example of this, Charles was driving up the motorway some time ago, and somebody had fallen or jumped off a motorway bridge. He was lying on the side of the road, and everybody was just driving past. He was the only person to stop.
What?
Yeah. yeah, it was quite incredible, and really we do have to start asking some serious questions of ourselves, I think. Now, uh, what is it actually going to take to sort problems out? Well, one thing is just to make, as I say, to make a commitment to not walk past, to actually find a way to resist, and that, in my opinion, that begins with ourselves. That begins with our lifestyles. That begins with our choices for where we put our money. I mean, just something as simple as not shopping in a supermarket, as buying stuff from a local provider, a local farmer, whatever it is, looking after our own health so we're not in the care system in any way, shape, or form, um, and then once we have sorted ourselves out to a certain degree, then maybe looking at what we can do outside of ourselves. But it starts with ourselves.
It
I mean,
starts
one
at
of the
home.
things,
Yeah.
yeah, and one of the things that I was really surprised about was, last at the end of September last year, my father passed away, and in the year up to the point, he had a good life, he had a healthy life up until about a year before he went, and in that year, he unfortunately had to engage with the care system. And he didn't have to go into a care home. He was able to stay at home until he died, which was lovely. But with the best will in the world, the carers that came to look after him didn't have time to be loving or gentle, or they just didn't have time. They were under pressure. They had to be there. They had to get the jobs done. They were with him twice a day. They had to be there. They get the jobs done. They get to the next place. And so if he was not in the mood, or was just being difficult, that became, they were reacting badly to that and so on, just because they didn't have the time, right? And I said to myself, I'm not going to end up, now of course you can't make any guarantees in life, but I said to myself, I'm not going to end up needing care. Now, a lot of people will have noticed that if you look back at UK column news a year or two ago, I was significantly carried more weight than I am at the moment, and that's because I decided that I was going to do something about my health, and I have decided to do something about my health and my fitness. And my goal in life is to now, in terms of my own personal fitness, is to attempt to live for as long as I can, as fit as I can, and basically keel over dead at some point. Right. I do not want to be reliant on a care system now. So that's one part of the story. The other part of the story is that my wife works with primary school children. She works with special needs kids mainly, but she's working in, increasingly in the UK, special needs kids are being put into mainstream primary school. So she's working in a mainstream primary school, and she's working in a challenging part of the city where the kids are from poor backgrounds and so on. But nonetheless, these kids some of them are still needing to they're still wearing nappies at 7 and 8 years old in some cases, right? Now, this young generation of kids that's coming up are going to be the kids, some of them are going to be the kids that are going to be manning the care homes and providing the care for old age care when you and I are needing that. And I'm saying to myself, if you think things are bad with that situation now, just wait 20 years, 30 years, right? So anyway, I decided I would, because I had a good friend, a guy I've known for many, many years who's been working on this himself. He's a few years older than I am. And so I had him, a guy called David Siegel. I had him on the UK column a couple of times for an interview to talk about longevity, not in the sense of living longer, but living healthy longer, and fitness, and the types of, as you know, if you're over 50 years old, what types of exercise do you need to do, because you've got to avoid injury and these kinds of things and so on. And those interviews probably had the lowest engagement of anything. And I just thought to myself, well, hold on a second, guys, we're talking about stuff that actually should be important to all of us. And it's not about, we weren't trying to sell anything. We were just giving advice. and I couldn't work out why that had low engagement. It was I don't quite get it to this point, I have to admit.
I have exactly the same thought process. It's something that has fascinated me for a while. Why solutions-based, or shall we say white pill conversations just seem to get no traction.
That's where it begins. It begins with ourselves, and the problem. One of the problems is that I see so many people saying, "Well, what can we do about it?" And they're looking for some big, high-level answer that's going to immediately. So this is part of the reason why everybody's been so enthusiastic about Donald Trump, for example, or Nigel Farage, or these types of characters, because they think that these people are going to come and solve the issues for everybody. Ain't gonna happen. I'm sorry.
Savior.
Right. For example, just another quick example, in 2018, when the Brexit referendum result came in, we got on the UK column news the following morning, and lunchtime, and said, look, guys, this isn't what it seems. This is Brexit without the exit. We're not leaving. Don't believe a word of it. And the number of people that wrote in and said, "You're horrible people, because could you not have given us at least one day of celebration?" And no, sorry, it's the same with Trump. This is not the answer. This is not the answer. The answer is going to come bottom up. It's not going to come top down. But unless we are healthy in every way within ourselves, we're not going to find the solutions.
It's because people are wanting a savior.
Yes. Yeah, but it's also I'm going to say it's also because a savior means that we don't have to do it for ourselves.
Correct. But that is an issue I've had with, I call it the personality cult of Trump. And it's not Trump's fault. He's clearly very good at populism. But for example, something that's bugged me a lot. I've spent the last few years trying to dismantle the COVID narrative. Trump comes in and suddenly says there was a lab leak, and now millions of people are back where they were 3 years ago. Because if you believe there was a lab leak, then you therefore are legitimizing the claim that there was a pandemic. I don't believe that there was a pandemic or that there was a lab leak. But now how do you fight that? Because this is the machine. And now you've got all the people who love him and they don't want to disagree with him, so they kick the can down the road.
So this is a great example. In a lot of the stuff that I see being shared in social media, there is no internal consistency in the argument, right? So it was a lab leak, but nobody died. Well, if it was a lab leak and it was a bioweapon, it wasn't a very effective bioweapon if nobody died. So who gives a damn if it was a lab leak? The lab leak story then becomes a non-story, right? Because there was no bioweapon if nobody died from it. So what are you saying? What is your argument? Are you now saying that all the people that died in 2020 and 2021 died of SARS-CoV-2? Because those same people will probably say on a different occasion that there's no such thing as a virus. Well, if there's no such thing as a virus, how can there be a lab leak? So, there's some very bad thinking going on within the community in many ways, and this again comes back to the point of we've got to sort ourselves out first. We've got to develop and actually analyze what's being said to us and what we're sharing. And yes, today it might be convenient to believe that there was a lab leak and the other aspect of this, by the way, is when we look at who's actually pushing the lab leak story. I'm not talking about Trump or at the political level. I'm talking about at the deep state level, the likes of Richard Dearlove, for example. Well, have we forgotten that Richard Dearlove was the same man who pushed the yellowcake story that brought us into the war in Iraq? Right? So the same man is now pushing the lab leak story. Why is he doing that? Is it because he actually believes that there was a leak from a lab or is it because he's retired head of MI6, but in fact he's still a deep state actor. Is it because he's pushing for war with China, which is what I believe he's absolutely doing, right? So, we've got to get our story straight and try to get some consistency in the arguments that we're making.
Yeah, and also the lab leak narrative, as you just pointed out, feeds the anti-China narrative, which is very much in the crosshairs now of the US.
So, look, no matter what you think about Donald Trump, as he is one person, and around him is the biggest deep state operation on the entire planet, right? And he is going to be, no matter what he is, he's going to be influenced by the people that are around him, and many of those people believe that China is the biggest threat to their way of life. Now, what is their way of life? The first thing we got to recognize that their way of life is not our way of life, because what we're talking about here is people that are, from the billionaire class, so what they're saying is that their cushy number that they've been on for the last several decades is a lot of that revenue is disappearing into other countries like Russia and China, and which they aren't getting the benefit of. So of course they're going to start pushing against that. Now, the fact that they created the by exporting the jobs and the technology to China in the first place, that irony, we can just set that aside as far as they're concerned. But China has become the enemy because it can't be exploited anymore in the way that it was 20 or 30 years ago.
It's actually really interesting because on the one hand, we want to talk about Trump and Putin and Xi Jinping, right? And these are powerful leaders, but they're only powerful within certain parameters that are given to them. And because you talk about the deep state, the DOD, the CIA are exceptionally powerful. And then, of course, the central bankers are even more powerful.
Yes, but again, it's clear that a lot of people have a worldview that what we're facing is some kind of cohesive thing that is controlling everything.
No, it's quite disjointed.
I don't see it that way at all. I see utter chaos actually on the other side, and although there, and I don't see a huge amount of agreement about exactly, they may have some basic agreement on general direction, but we all know that the deep state exists. UK Columns just run a conference in Cheltenham on this topic, and we gave some insight into what the bits of the deep state that we can see, and we had some people talking there that have worked for the deep state in the past, like Catherine Gunn, for example, who most people will know blew the whistle on the attempts by the deep state to get us into war with Iraq, and ended up watch her. And watch her film and read her book and so on, and get an idea for that, because I absolutely recommend that everybody does that. But even within the intelligence agencies, there is competition, and so I don't think there is a cohesive control mechanism. That isn't the point I was going to make. The point is that is at a certain level of society, and in general we can't engage directly with it. But we've always got to keep in mind that the deep state, whatever your view of the deep state may be, does not have its fingers on at ground level. That there's a middle management structure, and politics is part of that, and think tanks and so on are another part of that, and other policy-making organizations. These things we can see, and these things we can disrupt. And if we can disrupt that level, and keep disrupting that level of it, then of course they can't pursue their agenda, and that's what we have been doing, and that's what we got to keep doing. Unfortunately, some people have taken that to an extreme, where basically they have come to the conclusion that anything that is said by any kind of mainstream source, whether it be a scientific source, a medical source, a political source, a media source, if it's come from the mainstream, it's a lie.
Yes.
And of course that isn't true either, right?
No, exactly.
So
it's too simple.
It is a massive oversimplification, and even taking the view, for example, that Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin are just the other side of the same coin, because they're also pursuing CBDC and digital ID and these kinds of things. Yes, this is true to a certain degree. I think there's just simplifying it to that degree misses a huge amount of nuance and direction of travel plays a big part in this as well. So, for example, I was in China a couple of weeks ago, and I'm not going to say too much about being in China a couple of weeks ago, because I've just done an interview with Carl Zha, and I don't want to completely subvert that one. But what I will say is that people's view of this type of technology and people's view of even the state and the government is much more positive and optimistic than ours is of our equivalent. And I think that part of a reason for that is because, famously, China has lifted 800 million people out of poverty. The direction of travel is from relative poverty, and now people are relatively well off, and they're still heading in a much better direction as general. And they perceive that a lot of this technology has facilitated that. In our case, we are going from a position of relative comfortable, being relatively comfortably off, and we're witnessing our infrastructure collapse. We're witnessing our societies collapse. We're witnessing the effects of immigration, the effects of just non-investment in our societies, and so we're going in the opposite direction. And as a result, we are actually naturally significantly more pessimistic about our governments and so on. And as a result, we are choosing to elect people who are less than equipped to solve these problems. So in a sense, we're living our own demise.
Mike, that's also again a very good point that you're making. It's a conversation I've been having for quite a long time now. For example, let's just you mentioned China, so let's talk about China for a second. It's strange, but it plays into that oversimplification. You have people in the West going, but they're just commies. And so because of the word communist, the whole country of 1.5 billion people cannot in any possible shape or form be a success. But the reality is that they're applying a single word to a highly complex society that has existed for thousands of years. It's quite possible that these single word definitions are actually relevant. And we need to actually, as you did, go there and see for ourselves and realize that we're actually just talking nonsense.
So the second interview the second UK column interview that I did with Carl. Now this latest one I've did is for his podcast, but the second one that I did with Carl as a UK column interview, the first question I asked him was, "Is China still a communist country?" And that was having not been there, and he said basically not. And I'm going to say that having been there, China is not a communist country. Now it may be run by the Chinese Communist Party, but everybody there is running their own business, or they're earning a living. This is not the old sort of Soviet system of everybody being allocated a job sort of thing. They're doing exactly the same types of commercial activities. You could call it capitalism.
Yeah, but I think that
we're doing.
That's the point I'm trying to make, Mike. People are caught up in these words, these single descriptors. it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Is China communist or not? It doesn't matter. It's a success. Whatever they're doing is working. And on top of that, you'll notice that they are very community driven.
That was, like I say, I don't want to go too far into this because I've covered a lot of this with Carl. But yes, frankly, the scale of the population is something that unless you've been there, you cannot get to grips with. But despite that, you go to there's in the cities there's parks everywhere, and you go to the parks and there's groups of people all playing Tai Chi and they're playing Go or they're playing chess, and you just see community everywhere. And I look at Plymouth, a small city in China's 4 or 5 million people, and Plymouth, which is a small city in the UK, is 250,000 people, and there's very little sense of community here, very little, and most people don't know who their neighbours are and this type of thing. So it was something that was quite amazing to me that people are so that sense of community is there despite the sheer numbers of people.
I saw when I was in Amsterdam about a year and a half ago, loads and loads and loads of hyper-individualism. People just walking around in the city with headphones on and looking at their cell phones, completely disconnected from everything around them. It was really eye-opening.
When I was applying for the visa to go to China, I went back to London because you have to go to London to the visa center, and I had a little bit of time on my hands, and it was a lovely day, so I just sat outside the Bank of England and watched the drones go past with their phones in their hands, and they're they have no interest in what's going around them. They're just totally focused on that tiny little screen, and I'm just thinking to myself, well, maybe that's we'll come back to the earlier point. Maybe that's the explanation for why people aren't engaged anymore. They're caught in this drug. It
really is, because it again also feeds into what you said earlier about personal well-being and health. These are the things that matter the most.
So a lot of years ago, a doctor friend of mine said to me, giving a smartphone or a tablet to a child is the worst thing you can possibly do, because it actually physically rewires the brain. The brain develops in a different way, and the wiring of the brain is different in that individual compared to someone who hasn't had that. Now, we're recording this news program on a Thursday, this program on a Thursday, and yesterday's news program, I was talking about the latest report from Ofcom looking at media consumption in children. And they're making the point that in 2024, there was yet another increase in the number of children aged 3 to 5 who are on a daily basis using smartphones. 3 to 5-year-olds using social media. 3 to 5-year-olds, some of them having profiles on social media, right? And I'm thinking, what kind of generation, this is our future. What kind of generation are we growing at the moment? My kids are both adults now. They didn't have smartphones or tablets until they were 16, 17. And even that was too early, in my opinion. But now, we didn't force them on that. We just talked to them about it, and they took the decision themselves. And I'm not going to deny that they came under massive peer pressure to have a phone from a very young age, and they both said, through their own choice, they both said no, and they chose not to, and I think that it has served them well, actually, compared to a lot of their other school friends who ended up with gender confusion and all the usual kinds of stuff, and I think now they grew up with none of those issues. Now, I can't say for sure that was because they didn't have a smartphone, but because there may have been other influences at play there. But I think that it certainly helped.
What do you think the world is going to look like 100 years from now?
Oh, I don't think I can even guess at that because it could go so many different ways, couldn't it? I mean, humanity could absolutely destroy itself. I think we absolutely have that capacity. Or we could decide that this is not the way forward. What we're doing is not the way forward. So, it really depends on whether people come to their senses. If they accept, if we avoid killing ourselves through global conflict, then the next, I suppose at this point, looking at things as they are at the moment, the next most likely scenario is that we build ourselves this uber-controlled dystopia with CBDC and digital ID and the rest of it, and we've turned ourselves into some kind of transhumanist nightmare by merging with the machine. Or we could actually have decided that this is not the way forward, and we reject all that. But I think we absolutely have a couple of really major problems to solve, and one of those is birth rates, because we are without question building a real nightmare for ourselves in terms of how we look after older people, and I have a fear that we have decided that older people are useless, that they don't provide anything to society, that they're a burden in society, and so on. I think this is a message that's being delivered to children and younger people very strongly, and again, if we're looking at who's going to be looking after the elderly whenever you and I are getting to that point, without question, we will be at a stage where the younger generations are going to say it's probably easier just to bump them off.
I look back with fondness. I look, let's say, the last 100 years, and I think to myself, they made a lot of good calls. They made a lot of bad calls too. But 100 years from now, I wonder if they're going to look back at us and go, yeah, what a bunch of idiots.
Yes. I think if humanity survives, I think that is very much what's going to happen. I think this is a dark age, in terms of our attitudes to ourselves, our attitudes to each other, our attitudes to society. I think we absolutely have the capacity to come out of that in a very positive way, but it for sure requires some real.
They're gonna look at photographs of masses of people in the year 2021 lining up like cattle to get an injection in their arm while wearing a mask over their face, and they're going to be laughing at us.
Yeah. Because there was never a gun pointed at our heads in a real sense. We volunteered as a population. We volunteered, and that's the bit that still kills me. With a few exceptions, we volunteered, and we went out every Thursday night in the UK and banged our pots together for the NHS and all this kind of stuff. Yeah.
So, is there a moral of the story?
Is there a moral of the story?
I mean, if you look back now, you don't.
I think we have. I think the moral hasn't become clear yet. I think we. This might be worrying to some people, but I have always held the view that things have to get worse before they're going to get better. Because this comes back to what I was saying earlier on. What we're facing has to be in the faces of and obvious to the majority of people, and not just obvious to a minority of people. I think it's got to be.
Why it won't happen? Yuri Bezmenov, in his interview with who interviewed him in 1983? G. Edward Griffin.
Who it was.
G. Edward Griffin interviewed him, and Yuri Bezmenov said, you can take people to the gulags and they still won't believe it. They'll only believe it when the foot of a soldier is on their head, pushed to the ground.
I'm going to say, yes, I'll take that point, but we don't have to have everybody. We just have to have enough. And
a critical mass.
What I think that COVID did demonstrate is that there were enough people called BS on it that, in fact, at the end of the day, the whole thing has been a failure. So I'm going to say I'm not quite as pessimistic as that, because I don't think it requires everybody. But I think it requires more than there are. It certainly requires more than there are today. It requires more than there were in 2020 and 2021, but not massively more. I don't think it requires massively more.
How can I follow you?
ukcolumn.org is the website, and that is the place to go. We are on various platforms. We are often off various platforms, and Kenny has to recreate new channels from scratch. So we're regularly off YouTube. Where the platform we're most regularly off is TikTok, because that is the most censorious. TikTok, ironically, is the most censorious platform of them all. We're on Facebook. We're on Substack. We're all on all the platforms. But actually, we prefer if people are sharing our material that they share it from ukcolumn.org, because that is where we will always be. And when we got in 2021, when we got kicked off YouTube, so many people didn't even know we had a website, because they weren't, even though we mentioned it every time we do the news program, they didn't even know we had a website. So that is the place to go, and we do still need we do absolutely need support. So if anybody's willing to join as a member, that helps us greatly.
Well, I will echo that. As a contributor to UK Column, I'm very, very proud to be part of the team. I will also say, please support UK Column by becoming a member, because it is member funded.
It is member funded, yes. That is something that we decided right from the beginning, on the basis that relying on advertising didn't seem to us like the best model. Because first of all, what was obvious from the very beginning was that we had no control over what advertisements that people saw, and sometimes people were getting in contact with us and saying, "Why are you showing an advertisement for this?" Back when we were dabbling with this stuff, and we said, "Well, that's not our choice." So we decided in 2014 or something that memberships were the way, and subscriptions were the way to go, and that has done us worked well for us so far.
Well, on that note, Mike Robertson, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
And thank you, and welcome to the UK Column, Jerm, because it is fantastic having you here. And I'll just end by saying thank you to everyone who has supported us over the years and continues to do so.